Now shifting to the international press, we'll take the French wire service Agence France Presse with Max Delaney.
Thank you very much. Secretary of Defense, you've spoken about trying to force both Putin and Zelensky to the table. Can you give a guarantee that no deal will be forced on Ukraine that they do not want to accept, and also that you will include Europe in the negotiations about an issue that concerns European security? And can you tell us whether the US will continue to supply arms to Ukraine during any negotiations?
Well, to the first part of your question, that's not ultimately my decision. The President will lead these negotiations alongside our Secretary of State, our National Security Advisor, and numerous other officials that will be involved. And ultimately, we've played our role in talking to our NATO allies about what that would look like. President Trump, I want to point out, I've got the truths right here that he posted, called both, in case we missed it, Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky. Called them both. Any negotiation that's had will be had with both. I also am very encouraged by what the Secretary General has said here. Clearly attuned to the realities of the moment, the need for peace, and that the NATO alliance and European members will play a role in that. Ultimately, President Trump speaking to those two countries is central to the deal being made, but it affects a lot of people, of course. So I'm not going to be involved in those intimate diplomatic negotiations. That's for the pros atop the Trump administration who do diplomacy and negotiations. Ultimately, as security assistance, we have continued to provide what has been allocated. I think it would be fair to say that things like future funding, either less or more, could be on the table in negotiations as well. Whatever the President determines is the most robust carrot or stick on either side to induce a durable peace, understanding, obviously, the motivations that Vladimir Putin has had on Ukraine for quite some time. Thank you.
We'll have a second international press outlet. We'll go with the German paper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung with Dr. Thomas Kuczka.
Thanks a lot, Thomas Kuczka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Good afternoon. Mr. Secretary, 2 questions, please. The first one regarding the new defense investment pledge. When you and President Trump speak about raising it to 5%, do you mean European allies only, or do you mean the US as well, which is currently at 3.4% according to NATO statistics? And if the latter is true, when do you think the US could possibly reach the goal of spending 5% on defense? That's number one. Number two, you've said yesterday that Europeans need to take ownership of their own conventional security. So should Europeans expect that ultimately the US would withdraw the bulk of their forces from Europe and just leave in place what is necessary for nuclear deterrence? I know there's a revision going on. I don't expect you to name any numbers, but maybe give us an outlook of what we should expect. Thank you.
Thank you. I think nobody can or should contest the extent of America's willingness to invest in national security. We have a budget of $850 billion spent on defense. I'm in the business of ensuring that every dollar of that is used wisely, which is why we're pushing a Pentagon audit and making sure that we're cutting fat so that we've got more at the tip of the spear. 3.4% is a very robust investment, larger than most of our allies within NATO. Any defense minister or secretary of defense that tells you they wouldn't want more would be lying to you. I understand that. Ultimately, we have our own budgetary considerations to be had. But I don't think an unwillingness of NATO allies to invest in their own defense spending can be dismissed away by trying to point at the $900 billion that America has invested around the globe to include the NATO alliance and saying that's not enough. So ultimately, we are very much committed to the NATO alliance and to our allies. But without burden sharing, without creating the right set of incentives for European countries to invest, then we would be forced to attempt to be everywhere for everybody all the time, which in a world of fiscal restraints is, again, to get back to that word reality, just not reality. So, yes, we will continue to spend robustly. Our expectation of our friends, and we say this in solidarity, is you have to spend more on your defense, for your country, on that continent, understanding that the American military and the American people stand beside you as we have in NATO, but can't have the expectation of being the permanent guarantor, as I alluded to, from what even Eisenhower observed post-World War II. That shift has to happen. The peace dividend has to end. There are autocrats with ambitions around the globe, from Russia to the Communist Chinese. Either the West awakens to that reality and creates combat multipliers with their allies and partners, to include NATO, or we will abdicate that responsibility to somebody else with all the wrong values. You mentioned Europe. We have not said in any way that we're abandoning our allies in Europe. There have been no decisions based on troop levels. Again, that's a discussion to be had by the Commander-in-Chief in these high-stakes negotiations. And that would most likely come later on. But there is a recognition that the ambitions of the Communist Chinese are a threat to free people everywhere, to include America's interests in the Pacific. And it makes a lot of sense, just in a common sense way, to use our comparative advantages. European countries spending here in defense of this continent, in defense of allies here, against an aggressor on this continent with ambitions. That strikes me as the right place to invest. And I don't say that in a condescending way. I say that in a common sense, practical way. Investing in defense on the continent makes sense. We support that as well. It also makes sense comparatively and geographically for the United States, along with allies in the Pacific, like Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and Australia and others, to also invest in allies and partners and capabilities in the Pacific to project power there in service of deterrence. That deterrent effect in the Pacific is one that really can only be led by the United States. We wish we could lead everywhere at all times. We will stand in solidarity with allies and partners and encourage everyone to invest in order to have force multiplication of what we represent, but it requires realistic conversations. Those with disingenuous motives in the media, I don't mean to look at you, I'm just saying anyone that suggests its abandonment are trying to drive a wedge between allies that does not exist. We are committed to that NATO alliance. We understand the importance of that partnership, but it can't endure on the status quo forever in light of the threats we face and fiscal realities. Europe has to spend more. NATO has to spend more, has to invest more, and we're very encouraged by what the Secretary General has said. And frankly, behind closed doors, what a lot of our allies have said as well, acknowledging that reality. And that's why when I say make NATO great again, it's what President Trump set out to do in 2017. The press said President Trump is abandoning NATO. He's turning his back on our NATO allies. That's what the headlines read in 2017 and 2018. What actually happened? That tough conversation created even more investment to the point where now almost every NATO country is meeting the 2% goal that was said to be egregious when he first said it. Now European countries are stepping up, and President Trump continues to ring the alarm bell that even more investment is required considering where we are. So suggestions of abandonment otherwise continue to be disingenuous, and we are proud to be part of this alliance and stand by it. I'll take a